we're ready. Okay. Welcome, everyone. This is going to be the first of a series of different podcasts that we do here at Assigned Counsel. The judge and I will just kind of have discussions and talk about different aspects of the law. Obviously, we'd be remiss if we didn't say that we thank ILS for their efforts in securing funding so that we can have these opportunities to innovate and think of things like this and carry them out. Obviously, anything we say today is also not endorsed by any state or federal agency, including ILS, but they do help make it possible by securing us funding, so we do want to thank them. We also want to thank and welcome our guest for our inaugural podcast here, Brittany Penberthy. Hi, Brittany.
Hello.
How have things been going for you?
Good. Just been, practicing my brownie baking skills these days.
Yeah. Okay.
With or without marijuana?
I can do what I want now.
Yeah. Brittany, most of you know, but for those of you who don't, she was instrumental in a recent case where Judge Egan held that the prosecution had to turn over police disciplinary records. They had to obtain them first and turn them over in order to declare trial readiness. And I understand Judge Case just kind of ruled in the opposite way.
Well,
right?
we've got a motion to re-argue pending, so we'll see where that goes.
Okay, that's good. So we'll see where all that goes, but obviously Brittany's a huge asset to our panel. We're lucky to have her here today. And what we're going to do today, the reason I even had this idea to do this podcast type thing is I was thinking about how are we going to digest and talk about this new marijuana law. It's pretty long. It's, I think, 7,400 lines on the full text of the bill. The judge has it right there. So I thought the best way is we all kind of read it on our own and get together and just have kind of a discussion about all the different aspects of it. So what we're going to start with is kind of just some of the things that aren't necessarily in the penal law, CPL, anything like that, but things that we just found interesting. And, obviously it's a discussion, so at any point if the two of you want to chime in, you can save the audience from just hearing my voice. The legislative findings I thought were very interesting, and they give kind of a window into what the reasoning was behind changing these laws. They made a couple of points. Number one, marijuana prohibition has needlessly thrust thousands of people into the criminal justice system. People have suffered collateral consequences. Marijuana laws have been enforced disproportionately upon people of color.
On that point, Nick, I read an article just the other day that I think there was a study done in 2020 of all marijuana arrests, and it said that 90% of those arrested for marijuana-related violations were minorities. So I think those kind of findings played a big part in trying to level the playing field, if you will, as far as this legislation is concerned.
Yeah.
There's actually a local analysis too with regards to Buffalo arrests, and in that, from looking at 2012 to 2016, that 86% of those arrested were of color, African American and Hispanics, which actually constitute less than 50% of the population of Buffalo. So to think that 86% are targeted for those arrests is obviously, racially disproportionate.
Yeah, and Brittany also sent the a graph to the judge and I, and it's arrest rates per 100,000 people by zip code in the area from 2010 to 2020. And if you look at some of the zip codes, 14202, which is downtown, we're at 19,000 or so.
And then if you look at like Elmwood Village, 14222.
Yeah, it's
very minimal.
Yeah, it's under 1,000,
Yeah.
I'd say. And then the suburb zip codes, 14217, I know is Orchard Park, there's not even really a mark on the graph. There might be a couple arrests, but
right,
nothing that even is
very
enough.
targeted.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think we all know, we all socialize and interact with all kinds of different people. We all know people of different races, genders, nationalities who use marijuana, right? It's not a thing that nobody can say the reason blacks and Hispanics are arrested more often for marijuana is because they're the ones using all the marijuana. I don't think that's true. I don't think that holds water. So I think the legislature was probably right that there's a problem with the enforcement. And
I know
there has been.
nationally the ACLU finds that blacks are almost 3.75% more likely than whites to get arrested for marijuana possession.
Right, which is
It's quite high.
and I think especially in Erie County, I think a lot of African Americans live in areas that are more highly policed.
Correct.
So there's more of a police presence. You can't walk down the street without getting, at least seeing a police officer. And, maybe that's part of it, but I think part of it is, the things we learn, like implicit bias, things like that too. But, that's something that the legislature clearly relied upon in their decision to make it lawful. The other thing that I found really interesting, they said marijuana is far safer than opioids, which we all, I think most people would agree with that. But the second part, overdoses are down in states that have previously legalized marijuana.
Overdoses of drugs in general or marijuana?
Drugs in general. I don't think there is such thing as an overdose of marijuana. I think
you'd pass out before that.
you'd.
I'm not familiar with that.
You'd fall asleep and wake up with Cheeto cheese on your hands.
Is the leading death of marijuana use.
But I think the overdose, the whole epidemic we've been dealing with as far as overdoses go are opioids. And I think. I didn't look at the actual statistics, but in the legislative findings, they did say overdoses are down in states that have legalized marijuana. So I know as far as people using it for pain relief and stuff, I think you'd much rather have someone using marijuana than using opioids.
Right.
I'm sure you've had clients similar, but I remember clients who, 40 years old, never been in trouble before, construction worker, something like that. They have an accident, have a surgery, and then 3 years down the road, they're committing burglaries and all sorts of crimes, and it's because they're now addicted to opioids or they've taken the next step to heroin, and that doesn't seem to happen with marijuana, and I think that was probably part of the legislature's.
I think on that thought is that the justification that you could get an opiate prescribed to you legally, and though your use might not be within the legal realm that it was prescribed, you could not, at least in the years back, do that with marijuana. So now I do think there's those people that maybe, like you say, have those, pain and they're looking for relief. And while before, lawfully they could get it from their doctor, now, but an opiate, now at least they'll be able to get marijuana a little bit more freely.
Right. Yeah, I know. I have an older cousin. She's in her 50s, but she has Crohn's disease, and for a while, the medical marijuana laws were so strict that you couldn't even get it for that, which seems almost tailor-made for that particular disease. But she now has it, and she's thrilled, know, and it's, it's, I don't think she's being irresponsible. It's just gummies that she'll eat at night so she can sleep better and stuff like that. So, I think maybe that's a good thing. And then the last part in this is that 50% of the tax revenue will go to communities that have been disproportionately harmed by prohibition.
One of the articles that I read indicated or suggested that the anticipated revenue from legalized marijuana in New York State would be about on the order of $4.2 billion, with roughly $350 million in tax revenue to be distributed. If I remember correctly, 40% designated for education, 40% with a goal towards 50% to go into minority communities and give licensing preferences to minorities, to women-owned businesses and service-disabled veterans, and then also to fund training for more DRE officers. and to try and develop some technology for the detection of marijuana in motorists, because there is that countervailing public safety law enforcement concern that you can't forget. And but this statute kind of falls under the category, in my mind, of if you can't beat them, tax them.
Right.
Kind of like the Volstead Act in the 1920s. The prohibition against manufacture and sale of alcohol. We know how well that worked to try and stop the manufacture and sale of alcohol. People just found other ways to get it from bootleggers or what have you. So I think there's a financial consideration too here, that there's a lot of money to be made by regulating and taxing it, and so I think that's. But at least they're going to try and channel the money in ways that the legislature feels will kind of make up in some respect for some of the uneven law enforcement efforts.
Right.
And when you consider budget shortfalls, the costs of policing these marijuana offenses, especially at the low level, far outweigh the benefits of, getting those low-level marijuana users off the streets.
Right. Even NIC tests and using the CPS lab and all.
Absolutely.
It's
yeah.
It seems like it became kind of a huge waste of money at some point.
You just think of how many 22105 tickets that are issued and then
Right.
are returned to court, and a futile waste of the court's time, in my opinion.
Right. So what they did was the first part of the statute is what's called the Cannabis Control Board. So this is a small board. It's 5 people, and they make all the decisions. They decide the rules, the industry standards as far as the maximum potency of certain types of marijuana. I know if you buy the actual green vegetable matter, that will range anywhere from like 20% THC to even like 35% THC. So they'll decide what the maximum is on that. As far as the edibles, how many milligrams of THC can be in those edibles, things like that. They also decide who gets the licenses. So it's a pretty powerful position to be in. The governor will appoint the chairperson and 2 other members. And then there are 2 more members. One is appointed by the Senate president and one by the Speaker of the House. And that's the state Senate and the state House, or the Assembly, I'm sorry, not the House. So it'll be 5 members, and they're the ones who kind of get to decide within the kind of limitations that the law places on them, of course, as far as minority representation and stuff like that. I found it interesting, in the time we're in with executive orders and whatnot, the law gives this control board what they call emergency powers to limit or prohibit the cultivation and sale of cannabis at any time.
Right.
And I don't know what emergency would, maybe a food shortage and you have to use that farmland for other things?
They did say that they were going to do annual reviews, so I'm curious if perhaps there's, God forbid, a significant rise in crime as a result of this legalization, that perhaps then they would invoke those emergency powers and restrict, further licensing and such. Is just the train of thought I had with regards to that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Maybe if there's just this rash of vehicular assaults, by people
right.
who are
I'm curious
high
to
on
see
marijuana.
what, if any, effect this will have on the incidence of driving under the influence of alcohol and or drugs offenses under 1192-4.
Well, I think arrests for that will significantly go up, because that's going to, you're going to get into it in a little bit, but
Yeah,
that's
we'll
certainly
talk.
going to be a precursor.
Yeah, I think the arrests will go up too, because that's, when you're a police officer and you're walking up to that door after that you make the stop, and if your mind is set on elevating your level of suspicion, I think your options are a lot less than they used to be as far as what can get you there.
Right,
And one of the things that can probably get you there is suspicion for an 1192-4 or 4A. So I think, we probably will see more arrests for that. You'll know, Brittany, when you get your assignments, it used to be 22105 and 26503. and you knew exactly what the case was. Oh,
Yeah.
they went up to the car, they
Yeah.
smelled weed, and they searched the
Okay,
car and
well,
found a
here's
gun.
a shock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now maybe it's going to be 1192.4 and 265.03. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, no, they're gonna get creative, we know that,
Right.
yeah.
But yeah, we're gonna devote a large portion of this to the search issues. Office of Cannabis Management is so not the board, but the office is responsible for inspections, quality control, and they also have what's called a chief equity officer to make sure that the licenses are given to a sufficient number of minority applicants. And I believe also in there, a certain number of licensees should be people who have previously been harmed by collateral consequences from some previous marijuana conviction. So I guess, they're trying to take people who had things taken away from them for selling marijuana and help them transfer into the legitimate sale of marijuana. So I think it's a lofty goal, but if they can pull it off, that would be great. And then there's also a state cannabis advisory board. 13 members, 7 of them appointed by the governor. So the governor basically appoints a majority of this board. And they make policy recommendations based on health, safety, equity, things like that. So those are the people who are going to be listening to Mothers Against Drunk Driving and listening to, any other type of advocacy group. And
I think too that there's going to be department heads from the DEC, the Office of Children and Families, Department of Education, Department of Agriculture that are also going to be advising that board as well. So certainly,
Right. Yeah, the experts
There'll
and
be a lot of
of all
opinions.
different kinds. It's as I was going through the first part, I'm looking. I read the whole thing, so I'm starting at the beginning, and 50 pages in, I haven't read anything that matters to criminal practice, and I'm thinking like, here we are making a law that's, I guess in theory, supposed to be less government involvement and legalizing something, and yet we're making board upon office upon board who are overseeing all of it. So it's becoming this huge bureaucratic thing.
very regulated.
Yeah,
Help themselves.
you're right. So we'll talk quickly about, I guess, some of the changes as far as medical marijuana goes. They've loosened the requirements for a patient certification. So before, I remember I mentioned my cousin. My friend's dad he had radiation for a brain tumor like 20 years ago, and now the chickens are coming home to roost, and he's having serious problems. And they told him that it would way down the road, and he could not get medical marijuana for that condition just a couple of years ago. But now, it's loosened to where I think you could pretty much just say, I get headaches here and there, and you can get certified. I know you can, if you look online, there's companies who you do like a quick 30-second teleconference with a doctor from New York City, and they'll write a certification for you. And then you just file it with the state, and then you get your medical marijuana card. So it's not, it's been loosened significantly. For those who don't want to wait for the stores to open and stuff like that in 18 months, I suppose if you have a medical condition, you can just get your medical license. It does require people to recertify annually. So you have to have that meeting with a doctor once a year to re-up your certification. It allows a person to walk into a dispensary and buy edibles, capsules, oils for vaporizing, like the vape pens, vegetable matter. They say what the law says is the vegetable matter is supposed to be used in a dry vaporizer instead of burnt. So what they won't sell is like anything that's rolled in a paper or something that's meant for
You
smoking.
can still buy the papers though.
Right, you can buy the papers somewhere else, yeah. But I guess the government disfavors smoking as the method of ingestion. So they will sell the green vegetable matter, but they tell you you're supposed to use it in a dry vaporizer, for what that's worth. And then they maintain what they call a confidential list of medical card holders. The government does. I don't know how confidential. And we talked about
That was part of my concern.
we talked about the interplay between the federal gun laws and the state medical marijuana laws, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But I think this will come into play then when we're talking about exactly how confidential these lists are. I don't know.
I think too, did the legislation also waive the like $50 application fee too for medicinal licenses now?
Yeah, I believe they did.
So that's a cost savings onto potential clients that were seeking that.
Right, and it'll maybe allow more people to get prescriptions if that's what they seek. Judge Rachel just texted me. If you want to just slide maybe a half a foot closer to your mic,
Sure.
It'll pick you up better.
I hadn't said anything really worthwhile just yet anyway, so no worries.
Oh, everything you say is worthwhile, Judge. Okay, so besides the medical, now, as we all know, and the reason we're here today, what's lawful is adult use cannabis is what they call it. And that's just any adult possessing and using marijuana or any, concentrated cannabis. Those are like the oils that come for vaping or for whatever. And it's all lawful now. It's interesting because concentrated cannabis used to be 220.03. It was a controlled substance. Right. So now that has gone from 220.03 category to lawful to possess and use. So it's section 61 through 89 of the cannabis law. I guess we didn't mention, in New York they have the different laws. They have tax law, penal law, CPL. There's now a cannabis law in New York. So section 61 through 89 talks about the who can use and where you can use and licenses and things like that. Anyone's prohibited from selling to anyone under 21 or anyone who's visibly intoxicated. I found that interesting. So intoxicated, they must mean alcohol. So anyone who's drunk, if you walk into a cannabis store or bar and you're visibly drunk, I suppose they can't sell you cannabis at that point.
I wonder if that would be basis for a dram shop action.
I was just gonna say that's a whole new variety of dram shop here.
Right.
Yeah. I do think actually the liability could be extreme in that. Those dispensaries where somebody comes in an intoxicated state, purchases some more marijuana, gets in their car, commits, a vehicular manslaughter, obviously accidentally. That I do think actually that the dispensaries could, as this goes on, face some liability.
Is the phrase intoxicated limited to alcohol though?
They don't say that, but, in the other statutes, and in the case law and stuff like that, intoxicated only means alcohol.
Yeah, and what do they
drugs
say?
you can only be impaired.
Yeah,
So if
impaired.
somebody comes in stoned and from marijuana and wants to buy more, that this section would not apply?
If I were,
Case law is gonna determine, right?
yeah, if I ran the shop, I probably wouldn't take that chance. That's how
Exactly.
it's going to be interpreted. But, it's interesting. It's probably a good idea. I mean, someone's really, really drunk and then they smoke marijuana, they're going to be whatever that's called, but it's not pretty.
But you can imagine too, just frequent users, may appear at your dispensary, not necessarily impaired, but just, to the person that's not familiar with use.
Comfortably numb.
Right.
Comfortably numb, right. There's a lot of liability that could be exposed here. I'm sure it's going to be addressed by all those board members we have on all those boards now.
Right. No storefronts within 500 feet of a school. That's, it's a tenth of a mile. That's fairly long distance. So
Yeah.
there will be certain neighborhoods where it's going to be tough to even have a storefront, I think.
Well, the thing about New York City is what I was thinking about,
Right.
that'll really potentially limit places, but
Yeah. Yeah, and even certain areas of Buffalo, I know with the sex offender registrants, they were almost zoned out of most zip codes in Buffalo.
right.
And I think, were they 500 feet or were they 1,000? They might have been 1,000 feet.
1,000
1,000
sounds
feet,
more like it.
yeah.
Yeah. So, we'll see how that shakes out. I haven't been out with my tape measure to see. But
Either, yeah.
there are a lot of schools in the city. I noticed that ever since I've had to pay really, really good attention to the school zones. Even when kids weren't in school, you have to pay really good attention to the school zones.
Right, right.
I got nabbed once and then I never did it again. They got me right in front of, and this was right before COVID. And it wasn't a camera issue, so like I actually was pulled over. But it was the first ticket I ever got for going 25 miles per hour. But I got a ticket right on
Heavily
Elmwood by
officered,
Chippewa.
yeah.
That's Hutch Tech, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
And, I never even really noticed or cared that there was a school there because I think of it as downtown. I'm on my way to work. And I was pulled over and, the officer was very nice, but he did write me a ticket. And I learned my lesson from that. But didn't they just vote to get rid of the cameras in the school zone?
Yeah. But you think, too, the whole purpose of this legislation is to, counteract those policing activities in those neighborhoods that are impoverished, perhaps. And so you'd think that those neighborhoods actually do have the schools so close in position. So it's going to be a bit of a balancing act trying to fit in, obviously, these dispensaries and places, knowing the intent of the legislation and who you could provide licenses to. And the school placement, in my opinion, it might create a bit of a situation.
Yeah, that might be a tricky,
Yeah.
Maybe they didn't think that far into it, it's just, you think, oh yeah, you don't want it anywhere near a school, let's do that. And you're not thinking of the, I guess, collateral consequences of that, maybe, but we'll see how that shakes out.
Yeah.
You can tell what kinds of places there are gonna be by the different types of licenses. So there's gonna be dispensaries, and that's where you just go and buy products there and then take them home. There's gonna be on-premise use sites, and that's kind of like a,
Hookah bar.
yeah, like a bar type where you sit in there with, your friends at a table and you smoke
Do
marijuana.
municipalities opt out of that?
And municipalities can opt out of dispensaries, on-premise use, any type of stores being in their municipality. They cannot opt out of it being lawful to possess.
But they're going to lose out on the tax revenues too, because when we talk about this adult use, there's going to be a 13% tax, 9% going to the state, 4% going to the local municipalities. So I would imagine
And
that,
they divvy up, what, is it 25% of that to the county and 75 to the local municipality?
that's my
something like that?
understanding,
So, yeah.
right? So that's, again, we're talking about these hard budget times, that's something that I think many municipalities, although, we can't have all these potheads running the street, that money is green,
Yeah.
much like the pot, so.
Yeah, well, we'll see. It'll be interesting what a town like,
You don't want to be penny wise and pound foolish,
Right.
right?
right. I don't want to pick on any towns, but it'll be interesting to see what a town like
Eden.
does. Yeah, I was
Yeah,
just gonna
yeah.
say.
A lot of
Because
farmers out there, though, right to farm.
right, but there are probably a lot of strong opinions that marijuana is going to come and ruin all the children, and so it'll be interesting to see how they handle
Well,
it.
you look at the pushback you received with the clinics for opiate users and things like that. Specifically, I think Amherst had a lot of prohibition against that. I think that we're going to have a similar wave against this recreational use as well.
Right. Yeah. So besides the dispensaries, there's, like we said, the kind of bars, and then there's micro businesses. And I was like, what is a micro business? It's actually it's kind of like a microbrewery, but for marijuana. So it'll be like, Tim Franczyk's Growers. And
Craft pot.
yeah, craft marijuana. And I'm sure if you took that as an undertaking, you would succeed at it. But,
Certainly.
so it'll be like, they think they have a certain way to do it. They use certain soil, they use certain breeds of seeds and cross-pollinate and all that. And they want you to come in and try it because it tastes better than the competitors. And so there will be like the microbrewery type model. And then also delivery services. So those are the different types of licenses that there are, which I think gives a window into what it's going to look like and what's going to be available for people.
Did either of you come across any prohibition on an adult purchasing in the presence of a minor child? Obviously now we can go to 7-Eleven and get beer. This particular legislation now says, though, that even though an adult may possess up to 5 pounds, that it must be kept in a secured location or facility. So I was just curious if either of you came across that position. Like, I guess I don't know now. Can a child go into a medicinal dispensary and
I don't
with an
think they
adult?
can go in, but I think so that's interesting because the 5 pound thing, that's the only place when they say you can have up to 5 pounds in your home, that's the only place they say you have to lock it and keep it away from kids. And actually in the family court parts of it, which I didn't go through as painstakingly, but I did notice a finding of neglect cannot be based solely on the parent's use or possession of marijuana.
I did see that. I'm just
Yeah.
curious if there's going to be like a reckless endangerment charge. Here I am driving around with my 5 pounds in the back seat, right next to my kid.
Right.
If
Well,
that's-
if you're driving with 5 pounds, you'd have a problem.
that's true.
I guess you have to, if you want to possess 5 pounds at your house, you have to get it in increments, in 3-ounce increments. So that would be a lot of
Good
trips to the
point.
store.
That is, yeah, we don't we don't want any federal charges as I'm going over the border. Yes. Yeah.
That'll be interesting. But I think the whole tenor and intent is to treat it like alcohol. And if I stop at 7-Eleven and get a 12-pack and put it on my passenger seat and I don't open it and I drive home with my kids, nobody's going to say a word about that. And I think marijuana would be largely the same way.
Do you think about incidences though where a child could become arguably, intoxicated from a contact high?
Right, like if you're smoking it in a small
Yeah.
location with them.
Again, my suspicion is these officers pulling people over are going to be looking for any reason to.
Such as your car, yeah.
Yeah.
You might have a Leander's type law situation,
Right.
Yeah.
or an endangering the welfare of a child, depending on how the person is driving.
Right. We have the windows rolled up. We're just enjoying our recreational use. We have a child in the back seat. Officers pull us over. Officers are saying,
Although
there's smoke
driving and
billows
smoking is still not allowed, it's not allowed, right?
Yeah, it's actually, and we're going to get to that with the search thing because I think it kind of blows the whole, we're all thinking like, oh, this is going to be great. They're not going to be able to just search every car.
Truly.
But
yeah.
I think they're going to have ways to search cars and we're going to have to be prepared to argue against those,
Right.
but we'll get to it. But yeah, part of it is they added it right to the open container law that you can have an open container of marijuana, but you can't, nobody in the vehicle can consume it while you're driving. So if it's, if the officer walks up to the window and you open the window and a big cloud of smoke comes out, you're still in violation of.
Well, only
something
if the officer sees you actually, consuming it, in my opinion. I think,
Maybe.
we find those cases where occupants are pulled over on the side of the road, enjoying themselves at the park or what have you. There's nothing that says I can't actually necessarily, walking up and just noticing that there's a very,
Well, the
stinky
smell is
girl
one
or
thing, but if there's actually like smoke coming out, they might argue that where there's smoke, there's fire.
yeah,
I don't know,
yeah,
I knew the judge would like that one.
yeah.
Back briefly to the licenses, and we'll get back and talk about a lot of those search issues, but I found this interesting. So let's say you're a municipality, let's say you're a business owner in Hamburg, and they haven't opted out, so you can have stores in Hamburg or dispensaries or whatever. Before you apply for any type of license for the dispensary or on-premise use, you have to notify the municipality. And then the municipality gets a chance to object. And if they do, it's taken into account by the board, but it's not controlling. So that's kind of the way it's going to work for people who want to open businesses around cannabis.
I do think, too, the law actually provided the local municipalities with the right to control the hours of operation.
Oh, okay.
So that, too, I could see as, the village of Hamburg doesn't want any activities of that nature after 8 p.m. could be, like, in my opinion, unduly restrictive
Right.
on these enterprises.
Yeah, and it'll be, at that point, it would probably be pointless to open an on-premise use site.
Which may
Because-
be their go-around in, we can't necessarily deny it, or we're encouraging it
Right.
because it's lawful, but here are the strict parameters in which you can do it.
Because as we've seen with the bars now that sell alcohol, when they were forced to close at 10,
Huge
you
impact.
you would walk into anywhere and it's pretty much empty because
Right.
people. What's the point of going out if you're going home at 10? You know.
Right.
So I think the cannabis would be very similar to that.
It's not a problem for me anymore,
No,
but I think that's a function of
Early to
age.
bed, early to rise, I guess, Judge.
sometimes you play past 10, don't you? Or until 10.
Sometimes. We did last Friday.
Yeah.
But we purposely picked the happy hour show so I can get to bed at a reasonable hour and
Yeah.
smoke at home. No.
The other thing is, so you won't have any type of alcohol sales and marijuana sales at the same place. So you can't have a bar where you're also having people use marijuana. You can't sell beer at your dispensary, like CBD infused IPAs.
Super
You can't-
disappointing.
yeah.
Yeah.
And also no tobacco and marijuana mixed. So they can't sell like a blunt pre-rolled because the paper would be
Right.
tobacco paper. So those are just some little things that I noticed in there. I don't think it matters all that much. Some of the other things, warning labels. So it's got to be child-resistant packaging, and it must not be, they use the word attractive to people under 21, and it has to contain warning labels. So it'll be similar to maybe the cigarette packs where they have the warning label on there, and they can't use like, SpongeBob brand marijuana. It's not going to be something like that, I
That's
guess.
an adult cartoon there. Nico.
I love SpongeBob. I watch it with my kids all the time, but I think they would maybe find that being marketed toward kids.
Of course, yeah. And don't forget, too, there's still the federal ban on advertising for cannabis. So you're not going to be able to be putting it on the radio, and you're not going to be able to be putting it on TV
Right.
until the federal legislation changes on that. So
Yeah, and
that's
I
going
didn't
to
think about
really
that.
be limiting.
It's going to lag behind because I think only, I think one state did it after New York, and I don't remember which one. So I think it's 16 states now have legalized
Right.
for recreational, and that's far below what you need to pass any kind of law in the federal world. So, I think a lot of that's going to lag behind for quite a while. Like I said earlier, the board determines the appropriate potencies, serving sizes, etc. I found these interesting just because, you draw parallels to the beer industry. But what growers can't do is, pay the retailer for preferential shelf placement.
I saw that, yeah.
And with other products, they do that all the time. I
Yeah.
used to work at Tops, and I worked there for 9 years, through college and law school and all that, because they gave me health insurance. And they paid big money to have their stuff at eye level. Whether you're talking about Campbell's soup or you're talking about cigarettes or alcohol, anything. Any of these companies paid top dollar to have their product at eye level and the other people's product somewhere else. So I don't know why they decided you can't do that is with marijuana.
I thought maybe it had something to do with just not allowing one overly, abundant particular brand control the entirety of the market.
Right.
Is where I was thinking they were going with it. Especially because I think obviously we already have medicinal dispensaries. I think there's 10 in the state right now. And I know that those medicinal dispensaries can actually convert themselves to adult use as well. They're paying actually an increased fee to do that. But I thought because they're already in the market, obviously they've already, begun themselves and they're probably at least a year ahead of these other, up and coming companies, that maybe that was a mechanism to control that everybody is going to get a fair shot here. It was just a thought I had. I mean, I don't know how accurate that is.
Yeah, it makes sense.
They're
You don't
also
want to.
Putting big limits on multi-state corporations from the number of dispensaries that they can have throughout the country.
Oh, okay.
Very true, Judge, yes.
That's good.
Yeah,
I think the more you could keep all this in the hands of small businesses, whether you're talking about the growers or the retailers, that probably benefits the state a lot more than having, Walmart weed. It's
Nothing wrong with little Walmart weed. Yeah.
The grower can't give a sign or sticker to retailers to identify their product, except as approved by the board. So, you go into a bar and they have the big neon Labatt sign and the Budweiser poster with the bill schedule, and none of that can happen with marijuana unless and until it's approved by the board. Just found that interesting too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, it seems like they're trying to counter one individual company, having to step up from others, like you say.
Right, yeah. Which I think maybe goes back to wanting to keep at least some of this in the hands of
Fair
community
market, yeah.
members and people from communities who have been harmed. Instead of, I don't think the CEO of Walmart, I don't know really who it is, but I doubt it's someone from a community that's been harmed by the prohibition on marijuana.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's true or not, but it's. I guess the point remains whether it's true or not.
Is your preference for Target marijuana?
Yeah, I think that. As far as advertisements go, like you said, it's still technically illegal federally, so we'll see where that goes. But if it becomes legal federally, what the state has said, among a couple other things, but the interesting ones are no internet pop-ups. So when you're reading the news on the internet, you're not going to get pop-ups that say, buy this kind of marijuana. No billboards.
I thought that interesting.
Yeah.
Now I wonder what impact that would have on reservations, though.
Right. And I don't know how closely reservations are even going to have to follow all this, or how closely they're not going to.
Yeah.
And the tax issue on reservations will be interesting.
I didn't see any positions from Indian reservations. Did either of you on this legislation?
Nope.
No, I haven't even thought about that, to be
Yeah.
honest. That's because the saga with tobacco and
Well, exactly. That's kind of
reservations
what I was.
has been going on for
forever.
our entire lifetimes.
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah, that'll be interesting to see where that goes. No depiction of use in any advertisement, so they can't show somebody,
Yeah.
throwing a edible down their throat or smoking a bong or something. They can't do that on the advertisements. And no glorifying overuse. And I pictured what the ad would look like.
I did picture that too. Yeah, when I read that. Yeah. the guy passed out with the Cheeto bag. Yeah.
Yeah, I pictured Chris Farley.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
I forgot which movie because he made a couple, whether it was Black Sheep or Tommy Boy or one of those, where he's like standing on his head smoking marijuana, and then they show him and his eyes are like this big, and he's.
Yeah.
So that's just what popped in my head. I found it a little funny. I got a laugh over the weekend. But so now, we went through kind of some of the things that I found interesting that aren't related to criminal practice. Before we get to the criminal stuff, do you guys have anything else that's not really related to criminal practice?
No, I
Not
think you
particularly.
covered the highlights.
Okay. So we'll get to what is now Penal Law Article 222. And that's the all of the laws relating to marijuana products, concentrated cannabis, everything like that. So the first thing they do is they repeal Article 221. So that's gone. And then you go on to 222. And what it says is anybody can possess up to 3 ounces of marijuana or up to 24 grams of concentrated cannabis. Now, 3 ounces of marijuana, it doesn't sound like a lot. That's, just doing quick math in my head, that's probably over $1,000 worth of marijuana, especially when it's taxed.
Yeah, but 3 weeks ago, 2 ounces was a Class A misdemeanor, or
Right.
under the old law. So that it may not be
Significant.
significant in terms of its amount, but in terms of the consequence, it's pretty dramatic.
Well, no, I mean, what I meant is it is kind of significant as to the amount, because I don't know many people who would go out and buy $1,000 worth of marijuana and want to carry that with them. So it's kind of
Not myself. Yeah.
yeah,
Stocking up for the winter.
Yeah.
yeah. That's. I mean, 3 ounces.
Hibernation.
It would take you a long time, even with habitual heavy use, to use 3 ounces of marijuana. And same with the 24 grams of concentrated cannabis. I actually looked this up because, the little cartridges for the vape pens, they come in either a half a gram or a gram. So you can have either 24 or 48 of those,
That's a lot.
depending on the
yeah.
size. Yeah.
Yeah.
So they've really kind of upped it to where you can, it's going to be rare that someone who's possessing it for personal use would ever be above either one of these levels as far as what they're possessing. So the amounts are pretty high. Anybody can give cannabis products to anyone who's 21 or over. So we all know,
gift
like,
giving that's
yeah,
going
right.
to happen. A lot of gift giving.
Yep. We all know in the drug sales world, the definition of sale includes giving to somebody for free. So I was worried I mean, not worried, but it did pop in my head that would apply to marijuana. Like, you know, if you don't have a license and you give somebody marijuana, are you then selling them marijuana? But they must have thought of that, writing the statute. And they specifically say you can give it to anyone who's 21 or over, even if you're not allowed to sell it.
So compensation is the key, right? Or exchange of something
Right.
for the.
No consideration.
Yeah.
So I guess you can't have them mow your lawn in exchange for it or anything,
Yeah.
probably.
Well, in this day of technology and, electrical advances here, you wonder, though, with some, certain overzealous DAs, if there's going to be search warrants perhaps for your Venmo accounts or what have you, in trying to overcome that it wasn't a gift of sorts, that there were, monies exchanged.
Right. I mean, I'd like to think that that's not going to be their focus. Hopefully not. but-
Hopefully not.
Because really, what are they going to, they're going to heroically build this case that your
Well,
friend gave you $20 for the little bit of marijuana you gave him.
You think of, though, yeah.
And then what are you going to get? An ACD probation? It's not they're not going to get bang for their buck if they have to work that case up. But,
Agreed.
maybe in some of the other counties it might happen though,
Yeah.
where people are really worried about this law and what it's going to do to the youth and things like that. I don't know.
Yeah. The corruption of the youth, of course, yes.
Right. Each person may possess up to 5 pounds in his or her private residence, provided that it's in a secure place, not accessible to persons under the age of 21. And that I think it says reasonable safeguards are taken to
Right.
make sure that, yeah.
I'm curious what that's gonna, where that's gonna be, because I could see, charges for just marijuana possession in, the parents' room, like a reckless endangerment type charge.
Right. And what I thought of was, so can you keep 2 ounces out on your countertop as long as the rest of your 5 pounds is hidden?
Right.
Or if you go over the 3 ounces, do you then have the duty to secure it as to all your marijuana?
Yeah.
And I don't know what the answer is to that. So, I guess that'll all have to be argued when people get charged with things. Because there's no duty to secure it or hide it when you're on 22205, which is any person can possess up to 3 ounces. It's only in 22515 sub 5, which is the 5 pounds in your private residence.
Except when you look at how the reckless, endangering the welfare of the child is written, I think arguably anything could endanger the welfare of the child. So I do
Right.
think that it's actually, we're probably, in my opinion, going to see a rise in those charges just because, I can't pin him on his personal use, but I'll screw with him by just charging him because of the minor that's present.
Right.
Is the workaround. I was thinking that perhaps,
Yeah.
my
And
guess
can
is that they'll try to get creative.
Can they charge that if you leave like beers in your fridge though? Probably
No, but you know
not.
what? They've charged it on clients of mine that have left the stove on.
Right. Yeah, and
You know?
that's, yeah.
Or you got a crappy babysitter, and I've had clients charged with a crappy babysitter.
Right.
So
That's such a vague and broad statute. Like,
it is so vague and broad, and
I
the
feel
case
like-
law is horrible on it. There's just different opinions. Obviously, every case is different, every parameter is
Right.
different. So I just think that it could be something that we could see officers, trying to invoke.
yeah, well, every person's opinion as to what is
Yeah.
likely to damage the child morally is
Right.
different because every person has different morals. So
But I think every judge's interpretation of prudent acts of a person of
Right. I mean, I think I could make the
circumstance.
argument that turning the TV on while your child's in your house is endangering the welfare of a child,
Right, except on Friday nights, Nick. I let him watch TV on Friday nights.
Yeah, right. No, I mean, I do it. I let my kids watch TV, but
Yeah.
I could, if I were tasked with making that argument, I think I could make it,
Yeah. Yeah.
likely to endanger their moral welfare, yeah. So, yeah, that'll be interesting, but, again, I think if you got that case and you were assigned that case, you'd want to draw the parallel to, well, Judge, are we going to be charging people now who keep a 6-pack in their fridge?
Right,
Because marijuana and alcohol are the same legally
right.
now. you know?
Cigarettes, yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
So that'll be interesting too. But there is still going to be some, yes, the law now sees the two as kind of equal things, but judges are human beings and they all have different opinions, different viewpoints, and they're going to see things differently. So it'll be interesting to see, how the judges do that when you talk about endangering. That
That's
will
just
be
a
interesting.
thought, yeah.
Yeah. All right, so we're going to talk about vehicle searches now. Because this is what, we've all talked about this from, 2 years ago when they're talking about legalizing. It's like, oh, we're not going to have any gun cases
Finally!
anymore. Yeah.
More bad searches.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Because, I know we've all seen, it's our bread and butter case as criminal defense attorneys.
The smell of marijuana.
Yep, and then they search and they find either felony crack or they find a gun or they find whatever else they find, and then
Many times no marijuana.
right, a lot of times no marijuana, yeah,
Yeah.
or the tiniest little bit that's wrapped in 5 plastic bags that you would never be able to
Right,
smell
right,
outside
right.
of the
But it
vehicle.
was very strong. Nick. It was very strong.
Yeah, I mean, it almost knocked me over as I got to the door.
Right.
I,
Right. It was so
I actually
strong.
went to the hospital to be detoxed after. I was scared.
The flakes are strong. The flakes are strong.
But so first they say it's all in 22205. So they say possession of cannabis or related paraphernalia does not provide a basis for asset forfeiture. So if you have a bunch of marijuana, and it doesn't say lawful possession of cannabis.
Well, no, I was curious too because, don't the feds have, the right to come in over a certain amount and obviously seize those funds, and obviously we still know federally it's impermissible. So while I saw that line in the legislation, or now the law, it struck me as, I don't know actually, when it's in effect, how that's gonna work.
Well, I think the federal authorities would still be able to under federal law.
But the police seize for the feds to come pick up, right? So are we stripping the local municipalities or police agencies with the right to then hold it?
No, I think they could probably hold it, but if then the feds weren't interested, maybe they'd have to release it. Because I know, like, our investigators, they're all retired police officers, and they talk to their friends and stuff. And Buffalo now, they're of the opinion that when they, let's say they inventory a car and there's a bunch of marijuana in it, they have to P10 that and give it back to the person when they come to get their property back.
Oh, okay.
And they don't even give cigarettes back, I guess. That's always been the policy, but they're of the opinion that they have to give the marijuana back.
Hopefully
So,
the cigarettes back now too.
Right.
From my view of the statute, from the point of view of the criminal defense lawyer practitioner, aside from the new laws which, define what amounts are legal as opposed to when you cross the threshold and it becomes a misdemeanor and a felony and so on, to me, this is the biggest change in terms of affecting the practice, because as you guys have just been alluding to, this has been the go-to move for the police in so many, I don't know how many suppression hearings I sat on or prosecuted, as the case might be, when smell of marijuana was almost ubiquitous and universal.
Yeah, it's the opening line.
It was just
Yeah.
the thing, and
Yeah.
and that was the key to the open door.
Yeah.
If you smelled marijuana, you could search the occupants, and it gave you carte blanche, or at least probable cause, to search the interior compartment of the car. And now, as I think you're heading towards, Nick, it's significantly restricted. And so I'll defer to you on articulating the new standard.
Yeah.
And then we can talk about it. But to me, this is really significant. And then we can also talk about, as we did earlier, about what will this law apply to cases that are pending and hearings that have begun but not been finished. It's really, this is a can of worms that has been opened, and it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
Yeah, it's going to be. Before we go any further, Rachel's reminding me that I haven't done any codes yet.
Yeah.
We need to do 2. So the first code will be legalization. That'll be the first code, the word legalization. Hopefully you can all spell it.
I was going to say,
Well,
that's a doozy for us spellers.
We'll make sure our attorneys aren't
No points taken away from
taking
misspellings.
advantage of their new
Yeah.
right just yet. But yeah, that's the first code is legalization. So the first thing they say as far as the search issue goes, no conduct deemed lawful by this section shall constitute a basis for approach, search, seizure, arrest, or detention. So, I mean, I think that's pretty clear that if I'm walking down the street smoking a joint, officer can't even approach me for that, let alone search me or do anything.
So not even the level 1 inquiry?
No, DeBoer, nope.
No, because it says not a basis for approach, even.
Wow. So there'd have to be something else of an objective nature, unrelated to the smoking or possessing of marijuana, that would justify the officer to walk up and say, hey, what are you doing?
Right.
When he's walking close to that school.
Yeah. Or what if I'm in a public park where you're not allowed to smoke cigarettes?
Right,
So that's a $25 fine now if you smoke marijuana
right.
in a place where you can't smoke cigarettes. So they can approach me to do whatever. They could probably detain me for the purpose of writing me a ticket.
Yeah, parents ticket, yeah.
Hopefully they can't search me incident to that detention, but we'll see.
But I could imagine for officer safety, they could pat you down now, you know?
Maybe. I mean, they'd have to have some articulable reason.
Right.
Not
right.
just like, well, he's using marijuana, so I'm,
Yeah.
you know, maybe the outline or a bulge in the waistband or something, you know, maybe they could. But, you know, I'm sure you'll get that case. I'm fairly positive that you will.
Yes.
Are you guys aware of any BPD policy as far as this goes? I know in New York City, they issued a directive to all their officers, basically tell them what they can and can't do as far as possession and smoking of marijuana. And I know in Buffalo, there's an executive order that affects BPD policy on no-knock search warrants, but I haven't heard about anything relating to marijuana in the city of Buffalo and what the police can and can't do as a matter of policy.
I think the mayor, like 2 years ago, said no arrests where it's solely marijuana, and then like a year ago or less.
But that didn't,
But it never stopped.
that had no effect.
Well,
I
and
mean,
then
yeah.
a year ago or less, he said no more searches based on marijuana either.
Again,
and that didn't
did
stop
that take
either,
away any of our
so,
cases?
I don't think it's an executive order. It's kind of like the mayor talking to the newspaper more than anything.
But I would be interested if BPD did like what NYPD did in their directive, because I did read theirs, and it was interesting.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't think BPD actually officially came out with any type
A
of
position
directive.
one way or the other.
Yeah.
I don't think I read about it, but
Yeah.
they're
So-
probably not happy.
So that's the first part. No conduct deemed lawful by this section. But again, you know, if I'm near a school or let's say I'm at Delaware Park, I'm sure you're not allowed to smoke cigarettes there. I'm not sure, but you know, a public place where it's prohibited, or out here in front of the Brisbane building within 20 feet of the door.
You're right, right.
Does that mean that the officers can come up and seize me at gunpoint to write me a ticket? Probably not, but they could probably approach me and detain me for the purpose of writing that ticket.
I do think this is probably the greatest opportunity, though, to improve upon those community police relations, because where before we saw it as harassment, I do think this is an opportunity for officers to say, hey, man, I don't care about that. That's completely legal. You know, and
Right.
kind of build a better rapport with those, you know,
Or just,
those
yeah,
communities we wish to confront with regards to the racial disparities before.
yeah, or just like, hey, you know, people can smell it inside. Can you take like 10 steps that way? Would
Yeah,
you mind?
yeah.
Instead of like, you know, you're under arrest for a misdemeanor for burning it in public, you know. So then they go on, and I think this is the more interesting part. No finding of reasonable cause shall be based solely upon any of the following factors, either alone or in conjunction with one another. So even if you have all of these factors, it can't, that's not enough by itself to be reasonable cause. But if you have one or more of them with other factors, it looks like maybe it can.
Well, I'm also concerned, again, when we talk about those stopping of those vehicles, you know, we won't have the typical, I smell marijuana, but again, knowing that it's legal, I could see our clients saying, oh yeah, man, I've got my stash right here, opening up their glove box, and the officer is purporting to see whatever is inside it, or asking, it's legal, man, just tell me, what do you got? And our clients feeling a little bit more comfortable letting them search to find their weed, and, oh yeah, there's that pill that I don't have a script for. We always have
Right.
those clients that I had no idea I had those other drugs in the car when I let them search. I
Right.
just think, we're gonna have some predicaments where I think clients might get a little too comfortable voicing what they have lawfully
Yeah,
and opening that door for something else.
yeah, I think you're right. And, and then we're gonna have plain view arguments and things like that. Yeah,
Right, because again, I your clients are thinking, oh, I can do this now, no big deal,
right.
which is true.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, and how do you really say anything about plain view? That puts you in a really tough situation. If you had that case where your client opened up their center console to show them the marijuana and they could see a gun sitting underneath it, that's going to be tough.
Right.
Then it becomes credibility is the only thing you're attacking at that point.
Good thing we got those 58 records.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. What we did. Thank you.
Yeah,
We had about a month of them.
yeah. Yeah, that's going to be different too, because the police might be more hesitant to make certain arrests. They'll still make arrests for violent crimes, guns, things like that. But if they're arresting for something that they know you're going to walk in and get an ACD or whatever, why are they bothering going through that process of having their disciplinary records brought out and all sorts of stuff like that? So I don't know. We'll have to see how that shakes out too. It's probably different for each officer, but
Right.
anyway, the factors which are not enough on their own or in conjunction with one another are the odor of cannabis, the odor of burnt cannabis, the possession of cannabis, possession of multiple containers of cannabis, possession of cannabis near money, or growing cannabis. So those things alone cannot give reasonable cause, but there is an exception, of course. And the exception is that the odor of burnt cannabis may give an officer reasonable suspicion for an 1192-4 or 4A. They don't say how. Does the odor of burnt cannabis alone give the officer that? I don't know.
It gives them the right to conduct a more pointed inquiry.
Yeah,
in terms of observations of physical condition.
let me
and
pull up the
questions
statute.
about, well, have you been smoking, that kind of thing.
Right. I think that physical appearance might play, the glossy or red eyes is going to be very common now in those bill of
think
particulars.
so.
Yeah,
Slowed speech.
Yeah,
You know.
there are going to be a lot more DWI type scenarios, I think.
Yeah, I would
Because
agree.
that's the only way they'll be able to justify searching even the immediate area.
yeah, and that's going to be, I mean, that's really, and they don't give any other guidance, so they just say, the odor of burnt cannabis may give an officer reasonable suspicion for 1192-4 or 4A.
So what can you do at that level? You can, detain, you can inquire,
Yeah, I
pat
mean,
and frisk if you fear for your safety.
yeah,
It doesn't say that's enough to make an arrest.
no, but, I guess that would be enough to take you out of the car and do the roadside Olympics and all that kind of
Right.
stuff.
Well, and now with obviously the money we're generating from this, we're going to have more DREs available. So, where before we were waiting hours, thankfully, now, unfortunately, for our clients, there might be a lot more arrests.
Yeah, I think there's also going to be a lot of litigation on the blood levels. Because I looked at Colorado's statute, and they actually have, similar to how we have alcohol here, you do a blood test, and they have a % of your blood you're not allowed to be above as far as THC. Here, we don't have any type of guidance. So I don't know that, not everybody, let's say you smoke marijuana, Judge, at 6 a.m. today. Right now, you might still have some THC in your blood, but you probably wouldn't still be impaired or high.
Right.
So I don't know exactly what the threshold is as far as the weight in your blood, and we don't have that here. So I think there's going to be a lot of litigation on the blood tests, and we'll have experts, dueling experts. You know, some might say, yeah, somebody with a pretty high tolerance with this level of marijuana in their blood, they're not really going to be impaired. So shameless plug to our attorneys, you know, when you have those types of cases with blood tests and driving, reach out to Alicia, and we'll have plenty of experts ready on tap to review your case and see.
But you have to have a urine test still, right, for marijuana, right?
Urine test does. I don't think it does anything. And I'm not a scientist, so take it with a grain of salt. But I think what the urine test shows is the metabolites. So that would show that you've used it in the last month.
Right.
But I think the only way to get current status is blood.
I wonder if they're going to add a new statute that is the equivalent of 1192-2, or at least, as you were suggesting, create some threshold, which might create a presumption of impairment or non-impairment, as the case might be. 'Cause right now it's pretty wide open.
Yeah, I think they should. I think it would give good guidance.
Right.
And even for pleas and stuff like that, it just makes it easier if you have that standard benchmark to look at.
Right, right.
But yeah, I mean, I thought of that, but there will be a litigation on that. You know, I think we should be ready right off the bat to start contesting that, the blood levels and things like that. But back to the searches. So even if they do have the reasonable suspicion for 1192-4 or 4A, it says the search may only be of areas that are readily accessible to the driver and reasonably likely to contain evidence relevant to the driver's condition. So readily accessible, I would guess that doesn't include like the back seat if you're driving a vehicle. Only is it like a grabbable area? Is that how you would?
I was thinking of that, yeah.
Yeah.
Until, your gentleman says it's all in the trunk.
Right.
But you can't search a trunk now either, though, unless there's probable cause related specifically to the trunk, right?
Right.
Right. But if they give consent by saying, yeah, my marijuana's in the trunk, go ahead and take it, then you go in the trunk and the duffel bag full of assault rifles is in there, then,
I hate when that happens.
Yeah. Yeah. Or the, 800 packets of fentanyl or whatever it is that's getting you in trouble.
Do you think there'll be more canine units now?
Actually, the police were, not to get off track before I answer your question, I remember the sheriff's department, in anticipation of this, being really upset because you can't retrain a dog.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so any dog that's been trained to detect marijuana, I think, has to be retired.
Wow.
And they have to retrain a new generation of dogs to smell all other drugs, but not hit on the odor of marijuana.
So it's true you can't teach an old dog new tricks.
Yeah,
Huh?
that's...
Or you can unteach an old dog old tricks, I guess. And that's something to think of too. If you get a case with a canine hit, it might be worth inquiring if that dog was trained to detect the odor of marijuana, because then the dog's going to be too broad in its search.
Now, I'm not
your
aware
car.
of this, but are dogs trained to detect a volume of marijuana versus a singular small amount?
No, I don't think they can be.
They can't differentiate between a strong, and obviously larger amount versus a small?
I don't think so. Actually, I realize I'm talking like I'm a scientist and a dogologist and all this stuff. I actually have no idea. So I'm just trying to say, I don't think that they can be.
Okay,
and they have such a strong sense of smell that I would think they would pick up on a very small amount.
Yeah.
So that might be worth it. Even if, let's say they do a canine sniff and your client, they find your client's cocaine. Is it fatal to that sniff that the dog was trained to detect cannabis?
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Overbroad I don't know. I'm just kind of thinking off the top of my head. But
Fruits of a poisonous tree type argument.
right.
Yeah.
So it might be worth checking out. And of course, this all presupposes that the things that the anonymous sheriff's deputies were saying to me are true, that you can unteach the dog to hit on the odor of marijuana.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's, I have no direct knowledge whether that's true or not. So, but it's something to think about. So yeah, we talked a lot about the DWI suspicion. I'm kind of worried about it, frankly. I think it might just be the new substitute for the odor of burnt marijuana. And
Me as
now
well, yeah.
the DAs are just going to have to write a new script in their questions, and then, I'm a little concerned about that. So,
Or the rise in refusal hearings and, obviously we talk about collateral consequences, people losing their licenses for a period of time while you go through the court process and everything.
right.
Or the DMV. I mean, that to me could be significant.
Yeah, and they can only search areas that are readily accessible, but you know what they're going to do when they charge your client with 1192.4. They're going to impound the vehicle
Do the inventory search.
and then do an inventory search
voila.
anyway. So
Yeah.
that's going to be a problem. Hopefully, hopefully our clients don't drive when they're high. I don't know, you can take your marijuana anywhere you want, but just don't drive when you're high. The other thing that I was concerned about was they added to the open container law, not possession of an open container of cannabis, but consumption in a vehicle. And so when they smell the odor of burnt marijuana, is that then going to give them, because I know I've had these cases at the DA's office where they walk up to the door of the car and they see an open bottle of alcohol in the center console. And then they end up searching the entire car. And that's been upheld. It's fine, even though that's just a violation. They can do that for further evidence of their possession of more open containers, I guess. I don't know why they can, but they can. So now if they smell the odor of burnt marijuana, is it similar to that, where they can search the entire vehicle for further evidence of the burning of marijuana?
But I thought on that earlier, the singular issue of the smell of marijuana wasn't enough.
But the act of smoking it.
Right,
Well,
so
right.
I guess maybe they'd have to see the driver or passenger actually smoking it, or they say consumption, so, or throwing a gummy bear in their mouth or something, I don't know.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah.
Yeah, so you're right. It says no finding of reasonable cause shall be based solely upon any of the following factors, either alone or in conjunction with one another. And one of them is the odor of burnt cannabis.
Yeah, so I don't think
So you
singularly
can't-
that's going to be enough. But again, my fear is the voluntary, description of how much weed a person has or where it is, and here, let me show you, that's all I have, and
Yeah, or,
it just opening the door, or,
Or I wasn't smoking, my buddy in the passenger seat was.
right.
I'm driving, I'm being responsible. You think
Yeah.
you're saying the right thing, but you're actually admitting to the new open container law
Right.
add-on, which would then technically allow them to search your vehicle.
Right.
So,
Yeah, the grabbable area.
yeah, because the grabbable area part is right in let me pull it back up. It's right in the section that talks about reasonable suspicion for 1192.4 or 4A. And they say such a search may only be of areas that are readily accessible to the driver and reasonably likely to contain evidence relevant to the driver's condition.
And the open container ticket, is that only for the operator of the vehicle, or is it also for passengers too? Does it just say
It's in-
consumption and it doesn't actually say the operation?
Let me pull it up.
I'm
It's
just
in-
curious if we can ticket all occupants in a car.
Yeah, because I'm not sure what the
Well,
answer
if
was
you're
before.
a passenger in a car and you've got a cruiser, open can of beer,
Yeah.
can you be charged with violating the open container law?
I thought only the operator now could be
Let's
charged,
see.
but
No, it says any operator or passenger violating this section shall be guilty of a traffic.
okay.
So
So
what they
even-
actually make illegal is the drinking, possession of the open container, or consumption of cannabis. So it's not driving while somebody else in your car is consuming cannabis, it's the actual consumption. So I guess the passenger would be the one guilty. Maybe the driver would be guilty under section 20.
Yeah.
But, you know, I don't know that they would go that far.
I don't.
They would.
Yeah.
It's been a long time since I've been in justice courts. I forgot.
You silly little Nick. Yeah.
And then this has nothing to do with the search issue, but in a livery cab designed to hold 10 or more persons, it can be consumed by the passengers.
We can have a party bus?
Party bus, but by means other than smoking. So you can have the party bus, but it's got to be vaping or eating brownies or whatever it is. Because I remember when Colorado first legalized it, they had a service where you could be picked up by the airport in a town car, and don't speculate because I've never been to Colorado, so it's not me. It's just anecdotally I've heard it.
Right. No, not your own experiences.
No, not my own experience.
Okay.
But you can be picked up from the airport, and they have a pre-rolled joint sitting in the back seat for you in a town car, and you smoke it on the way to your hotel or wherever you're going. So they won't be able to do that here because first off, it's got to be designed to hold 10 or more people. And second off, you can't smoke it. You have to consume it by some other means.
Now, in that instance, can we also drink and smoke for those looking for a real party?
I assume if you brought your own, yes. They can't sell you both. They'd have to pick one or the other, I guess. Yeah. But yeah, I suppose you could. I don't know if I'd recommend it, but you could. Okay, so now the search issue, this just becomes more and more complicated because then it's, does it apply to the cases, how does it apply to the cases that where the arrest has already happened? And the first thing I thought of is I think the first thing both of you brought up when we talked about it was, well, it was lawful at the time of the encounter. So isn't there some kind of exception? Like we all know there's the good faith exception or there's things like that. Isn't that how we would analyze the officer conduct? And I think if you look at, the federal cases that talk about the purpose of the exclusionary rule, when it should be applied, when it shouldn't, that seems like that's the argument I was most worried about when I started researching this. But the good faith exception here in New York, it's only really ever applied to mistakes in law or mistakes in fact. It's never applied to a change in a law. Not to say that argument can't be made or can't be made by some DA's office somewhere and accepted by an appellate court somewhere, but those two things have never really gone together before, so it would be a first time thing.
So let's say there was a suppression hearing that predated the change in the law. The judge decides, based on the smell of marijuana, that there was probable cause to search, and whatever was found is not suppressed, and case is scheduled for disposition or trial. Can the defense attorney now move to re-argue in light of the change in the law and ask the court to evaluate it?
Well, should we start with, is the change in the law applicable to cases even before a suppression hearing?
Sure.
So let's say Brittany has a client who was arrested in March before this all happened, and your client's been indicted, you have your suppression hearing coming up. Is that police encounter going to be analyzed under the law at the time of the encounter, or is it going to be analyzed under the law at the time of the suppression hearing? I think you'd have a really good argument that at the time of the suppression hearing should control. And I'll kind of go through it. So,
do you think you even need to run a suppression hearing? What about a motion just for facial insufficiency?
Right.
Because a lot of times the paperwork actually indicates,
Based on the odor of
based on
marijuana.
the odor of marijuana, you know, blah, blah, blah. So I wonder if we could be moving.
See, but that's not really a sufficiency issue. That's more of a
But
constitutional.
that's not a lawful basis to stop the individual, to search the vehicle, or to, you know, stop the individual,
True,
so.
but I still think you gotta go through the suppression hoop to get there, unless you have a judge and a prosecutor say, why are you wasting our time? You
Yeah,
know what's gonna
yeah.
happen here.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if the prosecution agrees
rest
with
on the
all the
papers,
facts
yeah.
that you put on the papers,
Yeah,
then there's no factual dispute, and then it could be decided on the law.
Yeah.
But I think generally there's gonna be a hearing, you know, just like they give us hearings when we don't always make the best, factual allegations that are legally sufficient.
Right,
They give
right.
us hearings anyway. I
Yeah.
think it's just kind of the favored way of
disposing of matters.
settling the disputes.
Yeah,
But anyway, so the first thing I found was the Court of Appeals saying statutes implicating criminal procedure apply to all cases still pending at the trial court or on direct appeal. So that's like your recent 30-30 issues. There's case law that applies to any pending case. You know, the discovery changes. They
Right.
didn't only apply to new arrests after January. They applied to any pending
right,
case.
right, retroactive.
There's an old Court of Appeals case on a change to the CPL 6045, which is like an identification thing and evidence of prior identifications. And that applied to any case that was pending at the time of the statute change. And some of the things they say, you know, it sounds promising. You know, some of the quotes are, the law to be utilized is that in effect at the time the decision is rendered. That's a quote. Another one, it is a general rule that in the absence of words of exclusion, a statute which relates to the form of procedure or the mode of attaining or defending rights is applicable to proceedings pending or subsequently commenced. So it would apply to pending cases. Another one, traditional common law methodology contemplates that cases on direct appeal will generally be decided in accordance with the law as it exists at the time the appellate decision is made. And then this is one that's not on appellate decisions. So this is the Court of Appeals back in 1956, albeit. And I'll make sure I send this PowerPoint out to anybody who signed up so you guys have this stuff so we don't have to spend our time reading citations out. But the last quote is, whenever the legislature alters existing law, a certain measure of inequality is bound to ensue. Where the change is ameliorative and reflects a judgment that the earlier law was unduly harsh or unjust, a court should not withhold the benefits of the new statute to one tried after its passage. And then, sorry, there's one more. While procedural changes are, in the absence of words of exclusion, deemed applicable to subsequent proceedings and pending actions, and this is the Fourth Department, and this is where, actually, we'll stop before that one, so we can talk about, we're still on the case where Brittany has the client arrested, who was arrested before the law changed, but the hearing hasn't happened yet. I think you could use a lot of these quotes and cases and make a really good argument that because it's a statutory change and not a change based on case law, that it has to apply to all pending cases. Because
I agree.
there's no exclusionary language that says this doesn't apply to pending cases. So I think we'd have a really good argument based on that. So if you haven't had your suppression hearing yet and they're relying on the smell of marijuana, I think you're in really good shape on that. Now, if they analyze it as if it's like a judicial decision, there's like a 3-pronged test to determine whether it's applied to pending cases. So they look at the purpose to be served by the new rule, the extent of the reliance on the old rule, and the effect on the administration of justice of retroactive application. And I think based on those factors, we could make, again, a pretty good argument, because the purpose to be served by the new rule is to, eradicate social and racial inequities
Right.
based on police interactions. And I think that, you can argue that's a pretty compelling purpose. Uh-oh. We have a question. We'll get to it in a second. The extent of reliance on the old rule, I think it was relied upon heavily, but I don't know that that's plays in the prosecution's favor. It might play in our favor.
Right.
And the effect on the administration of justice of retroactive application, I think it would benefit the administration of justice. So if we have to go through that three-pronged test, we probably can do it somewhat successfully. But then we get to what the judge was talking about, which is the case where the suppression hearing has already happened. And what I found was a Fourth Department case from 2020. And it's based on one of the changes, I think maybe the discovery or 3030 law. But what they said is, while procedural changes are, in the absence of words of exclusion, deemed applicable to subsequent proceedings and pending actions, it takes a clear expression of the legislative purpose to justify a retrospective application of even a procedural statute so as to affect proceedings previously taken in such actions.
Ooh, I don't know if I like that.
Yeah, so it will be, that's what the argument will be against having it apply to the suppression hearing.
Yeah,
But I guess what I'd say back to that is, well, it's going to apply on appeal.
right.
So why not get it right now?
Yeah, exactly.
Right,
So why
right.
not get it right now?
And you always have the right to, do you, Judge, to do a motion to re-argue if there's a mistake of law by a judge, correct?
Yes.
Within 30
Under
days.
the CPLR, I
Right.
think it's what, 22, 21?
Yeah, but
something
it's
or other?
within 30 days.
Yeah, you got within 30 days, and
Yeah.
you basically have to tell the judge you misapprehended or misapplied the law.
But is it within 30 days of the judge's decision or within 30 days of a law change? Because my argument would be the law change.
Under the statute, I think it's within 30 days of the judge's
Of the decision? I
I
order.
think it's actually, though, check that, because it might be within 30 days of the DA's service of the decision
Yeah,
upon
it's-
you.
It may be
Oh.
that.
And the
It may
DA
be
doesn't
that.
always serve the
Oh,
decision.
the DA never serves
So
the
your
decision.
30 days hasn't even started
Yes.
yet in that case.
Yeah.
Oh, well, then that's a really good point to advertise, that based upon, procedurally what needed to be done by the DA. I don't think I've ever been served with an order from a DA.
No,
Is that
the-
something that you would
The
do?
Appeals Bureau does it.
Right, but
But
truly, if we
religiously,
have, like
'cause
the
they-
judge said, a decision, and that decision has yet to be served upon me,
Yeah,
and that
you'd have to
hearing-
double check the CPLR on that, but
Yeah, it's,
I would encourage anyone who's got a case pending where the suppression was denied in this kind of a case to bring a
Right.
motion to
re-argue.
re-argue.
yeah, if nothing else, it might help you preserve the issue. Second code, we're going to talk for another 5 minutes, but the second code for people who want to leave is cannabis, CANNABIS. That's the second and last code.
Did you want to get to the question, or are we going to hold off?
No, we'll get to it. I think we're still kind of in the middle of
Okay.
because what was the last thing that was said before I interrupted with the pesky code?
All I heard was cannabis.
Yeah.
You got me distracted.
Yeah, anyway, we got distracted. So, I was talking about preservation. So, the law at the time of the decision of the appeal will be applied. However, if it's not preserved, so if you never argued, well, the smell of marijuana, Your Honor, is insufficient.
Well,
To
then you
permit
better bring a motion to re-argue, right?
You
How
better
else
bring
you-
a-
How else are you going to preserve it for appeal
Right.
then?
And I don't need, hopefully the motion to re-argue does preserve it. Because you didn't make it at the time, and what if they
Yeah, but
just
what
deny
would-
the motion to
What would have been the
re-argue?
reason to make the argument under the old law when the smell of,
When you didn't
when
even
all the
know.
Well-
case law pretty much said it was okay?
I know,
Yeah.
but they hold you to that standard. I know that because of the,
What about a motion to eliminate before a trial? Would that properly preserve it?
I mean, I'd do anything you could. You
Yeah.
don't know
Keep
what,
making the records.
you don't know what the
Yeah.
appellate court's
Keep
gonna
literally
say.
that record.
Yeah, if you have
yeah.
to, flip the table over in the courtroom over, if, you
Yeah.
know. But I know that because of the depraved indifference changes. So that when the courts made it more restrictive where a one-on-one killing could rarely, if ever, be depraved indifference,
Right.
that applied to all cases that were on direct appeal. So someone who lost their trial, the one-on-one
That was the one
shooting.
we had, right?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
It applied to any case that was still on direct appeal, but they were very stringent on the preservation requirement.
Right.
And the argument was, well, how am I supposed to preserve something when it wasn't even the law? You were supposed to anticipate that change in the law and make the argument. And if you didn't, your client wasn't getting the benefit of that change in the law. So then in appeals, we would try to argue, well, then it's ineffective assistance
Oh, I
of
was gonna
counsel.
say, then,
They should have
yeah.
made that argument. And what the appellate court said to that was, what the Fourth Department said was, no, how are they supposed to anticipate a change in the law? That's not ineffective. So you were really stuck if you didn't preserve
damned
it.
if you didn't,
Yeah.
And if you did foresee it and made that argument, your client is sitting pretty.
Yeah.
But if you didn't, your client's in big trouble. So I would do, on those pending cases where you haven't yet had the suppression hearing, I would do anything you can, motion to re-argue, anything, to try to preserve that issue. Or, hire them preservation, get it redecided and
Right.
decided in accordance with the new law.
Right.
So just to wrap up, I guess, we're probably through the search part. You can't smoke or vape cannabis anywhere smoking is prohibited or on school grounds. The fine for that, it's a civil penalty of $25 or 20 hours of community service. So $25 if you want. Next time you're sitting in Shays, if you want to light up a joint while you're enjoying the play, it'll cost you $25 to do so. No, I assume you would get kicked out of the
Probably
place.
cheaper than the popcorn and
Yeah.
soda.
Yeah, right. I'm saying that facetiously. Don't take it seriously, anyone out there. As far as growing goes, people can have up to 3 immature and 3 mature plants at any one time. I don't know how they classify those, but that's what they can have. Nobody under 21 can grow. You have to do so at your private residence or on the grounds of your private residence. But a penalty for a violation of this section has to be enacted by the municipality, first off. So there is no
Local ordinance.
penalty yet
Right.
unless your locality makes one. And it cannot exceed a civil penalty of $200. So I take that to mean if your client has 500 plants in their house, the most they can get is a $200 penalty. Says this section does not take effect until the Office of Cannabis Management issues regulations, which they have to do within 6 months. So I don't know if that means that you can grow them unfettered for now, or you can't grow them at all for now. But I don't see anything in any penal law that would prohibit you from having cannabis plants other than this. So I would say right now, you can just grow 500 plants, and once they make the regulations, then it would be 3 immature and 3 mature. I don't know, do you agree with that?
That's the riskier way to go.
Right.
But,
Yeah, it's certainly risky. Again, I don't like the attention of any fed
Right.
prohibited
Well, that's
activities.
true. Like, all of this is subject to it still being unlawful federally.
Right.
So I guess, yeah, that's a good disclaimer, and I'm glad you mentioned that.
Just a little worried about that.
yeah.
They're kind of important.
The weight thresholds, very quickly, up to 3 ounces or 24 grams of concentrated is lawful. Unlawful possession, which is a violation, $125 fine. More than 3 ounces or 24 grams, less than a pound or 5 ounces of concentrated. So if you get up to over that pound or 5 ounces, it's a misdemeanor. Then if you get up to 5 pounds, you're finally a Class E felony, or 2 pounds of concentrated, which is,
A lot.
yeah.
Yeah.
Or then you're at an E felony. And to get up to the D felony, you're at 10 pounds or 4 pounds of concentrated. So, only the kingpins are going to be guilty of any type of real serious crime as far as possessing cannabis. Sales, pretty similar. C felony, you need to have sell 100 pounds or more of marijuana or concentrated. Selling more than 5 pounds or 2 pounds of concentrated is a D. Selling more than a pound or more than 5 ounces concentrated, or selling more than 3 ounces to someone under 21 is an E.
What about cumulatively, occupants of a vehicle or a house, cumulatively, the amounts, the constructive possession argument where, I have some, the judge has some, Dick has some,
Yeah, that would be, I remember once and not to go too far over, but I had 3 guys in a car possessing crack cocaine. all pointing the finger at each other.
Right.
And it was just over the felony weight. And when we pre-tried the case with Judge Biscaglia, he said, well, you know, what if after a non-jury trial we found that they all possessed some of it and they were all guilty of a misdemeanor? And I said, do you have a jury trial waiver with you right now, Judge? You know, because my client was okay with a misdemeanor, you know, and a conditional discharge. So it would be that type of argument, I guess.
Yeah.
You know, no, it's not all mine. You know, Brittany possessed 2 ounces of it, which takes me under the threshold.
Right.
You know, and that'll be arguments we make at trials and stuff like that, I guess. So the unlawful sale of less than 3 ounces is just a violation punishable by a fine of not more than $250. So they're not really serious about the sales. I think really
Also in that category, if you sell any amount to someone under 21, I think that's also a violation.
Yes, violation.
Unless there's a less than 3 year age difference between the seller and the buyer.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Thank you for that. But that's true.
What about even as a minor? Like a minor selling, so you're saying a minor selling, because
No,
minor.
someone over 21 selling to someone under 21.
What about a minor selling to another minor?
Doesn't say. You're probably treated as a youthful offender eligible.
I'm just curious, you know, you have the college student who's 18 selling to, you know, his college roommate. Because I thought it said 21, right? Someone over the age of 21 selling to somebody younger.
Under, but it doesn't say anything
It
about
didn't-
someone
right.
under 21 possessing or selling.
So if we could keep all those activities at the college level is what it sounds like.
Yeah. Yeah, that is what it's, yeah, that's interesting. Why they would make that. type
Right?
of cutoff.
It didn't make
Yeah.
any sense. Like, why are we only concerned about the adult, you know, over
If
the
you're
age of
19,
21?
you can just sell with impunity. Yeah.
You just have fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then just to wrap up, there's some post-conviction stuff. Really, any old marijuana conviction, excluding first-degree possession or third-degree sale or higher, so you're talking serious, automatically sealed. It's got to be sealed soon by the administrative judge. But you can also move to vacate, and the court has to presume that either the plea was not knowing, voluntary, and intelligent, or that the collateral consequences you suffered constitute cruel and unusual punishment based on the state constitution. And those are rebuttable presumptions. I don't know that the prosecution's going to try to rebut those.
Right.
So basically, you can really move to vacate anything below a first-degree possession or anything below a third-degree sale. And you should have a lot of success doing that. I know Jeff Santoro has one going on right now. His client's got a gun case, and he's a second felony offender. His prior is a marijuana, and I think it's like third degree. It was a felony marijuana, maybe a D. And he's now moving to vacate that old marijuana conviction, which will make him a first-time felon on his new gun case.
So will that make a lot of those possibly imprisoned on the heightened standard then eligible for early release now? Are we going to see a lot of applications for that?
Yes.
I wonder, yeah, so
I didn't even think
you've
about
already
that.
been sentenced as a second felony
Right.
offender. You now get that vacated. Yeah, you'll be able to do a 440.
Right?
Yeah.
You're going to have to do a 440,
Yeah.
and potentially you've served your time now.
Yes.
So that is actually a very large impact,
Yeah.
potentially.
Yeah, so that's you know, that should have an impact on some of our clients. They took out the limits on sua sponte ACDs that the prosecution doesn't offer.
Right.
You used to not be able to get it over the people's objection if there was a prior drug ACD or conviction, and now they can, as long as they find exceptional circumstances, which, you know, they'll do if they feel like it. And then just the last thing that I found interesting was employers cannot discipline you or have any negative consequences for use outside of work.
But there could be federal implications.
Yeah, if the discipline's required by federal law, or if it would render the employer guilty of a federal law or cause the loss of federal funding, then they can. But your typical employer that doesn't have federal contracts to make widgets or whatever the case may be, they can,
There's a case that I cited in my article out of Colorado where there was an employee of Dish Network.
Janitor, yeah.
And the guy was a good employee, he was disabled, he had he had medical marijuana, it was, in the state it was legal. He got fired because of a random drug test that showed marijuana, and it was upheld.
did they say that, is that
Because he was in
FCC?
violation of federal law by possessing marijuana.
Because the FCC like regulates the Dish Network?
I didn't get that far into the decision, but that would make sense.
Well, because here, New York's, under New York, that wouldn't fly if it was just, you violated federal law, so you're,
Right.
because they say that you can't do it solely on that basis, only if it would cause the employer to be in violation of federal law by not firing you, so like if they're somehow federally regulated, or if it would cause them to lose a contract, like if, there's some federal regulation that you can't contract with a widget company unless they do drug testing for marijuana, then they can. So I think we've about run our course. We're over the time. I was actually worried that we were going to fill an hour and a half, and we could have done another hour easily on this. So
I have a lot of opinions, Nick.
Yeah.
You are not going to have a problem.
So I hope everyone enjoyed it. The judge and I are going to do this pretty frequently and periodically. I think we'll have shorter episodes in the future, but it won't be such a topic that we have to really go through the nuts and bolts. Thanks for coming, Brittany.
No,
I know
happy. Thank you.
I gave you
both
about
for
a week
inviting me.
notice and asked you if you could do this. I had a great idea, and sometimes when I do that, I just want to run with it right away.
No, I really do appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah,
Learned a lot.
thanks for having us, and you know that everyone sees you as a huge asset to our panel. So
I'm eager to make some motions here.
yeah,
I'll tell you that.
it's going to be interesting. And if people want to bounce issues off me or the judge, feel free to give us a call or email us, text, whatever you want to do. So thanks everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
I feel like Malcolm Gladwell. Here. Hey, Rachel.
That could really be big, though, on the prison system.
Yeah, there will be a lot of motions from even pro se from prisoners. There might be some way to identify who the people are.